So today's episode is all about being ready. There are a lot of times where you happen to be out and you'll see a beautiful composition or a nice image, but you don't have your camera with you, or you have your phone, and you have to make do. One of the things that I've learned is that yes, while the best camera that you out there is the one that you have on you, if you can be ready for better than just the camera, even with the great sensors and stuff that are in camera phones now, the happier you'll be. I just finished, I was at a hockey game with the Calgary Flames. Unfortunately, they lost to the Jets in a shootout, so that kind of sucks. But I had my camera with me, and I decided I'd take a hike up the hill behind the Saddledome and just see what I could see. And so there's a beautiful sunset coming on right now. It's just over here. And unfortunately, there is a line of cloud which will probably prevent it from being a nice, really pink and orange sunset. It's still just a really beautiful image, and it's lighting up the downtown core, which is right behind my shoulder here, really, really beautifully. So, while I've never done architecture photography or cityscapes, I figured I'd give it a shot and see what I can come up with. It's something new, something that I wanted to try, and who knows, maybe it'll turn out great, maybe it'll turn out like garbage and we have nothing, but you'll never know if you don't try. So right now I've got my tripod set up aiming at downtown. The settings right now are f8 at 8 seconds exposure. I am using the high res mode, so it is taking 8 shots at 8 seconds each, so it's taking almost about a minute and a half to expose. But yeah, I think it's going to be really, really beautiful. The sunlight is just perfectly bouncing off one side of each of the buildings. So, we'll give it a shot, and I'll check in with you guys in about 10 minutes here once the sun is actually set and see what we got, and then head back to the studio. So we'll talk to you in a few minutes here. Okay, so I made it back to the car. As I expected, the colors just didn't happen. So, I think what I got was pretty good. The light was really, really beautiful, even if it didn't kind of explode into that rainbow of sunset colors, but that's all right. It's still really pretty. I'm really excited to get back to the studio just to check out my first attempt at a cityscape. I have no idea how it's going to turn out. This is my first shot, so we'll see what happens. So I'm going to head back to the house to warm up first, and then probably head to the studio first thing in the morning and start working on the edit. So we'll see you back at the studio within the next kind of 12 to 24 hours. All right, and welcome back to the studio. On your screen, you can see that this is the best shot that we got from the shoot just behind the Saddledome. As you can tell, it's fairly underexposed, although that is partially by design. When I shoot sunsets, I typically get probably a little too nervous that I'm going to overexpose the highlights. And in my personal opinion, this is obviously not a rule or anything, I just would personally have shadows that are too dark and underexposed too far and clipping in the blacks than having overexposed highlights. And the reason for that is just a personal thing. It's when you have an overexposed highlight, what ends up happening is if you try to drop them down, they just turn gray. People are much used to seeing dark and shadows, like black shadows, than they are seeing really weird clipping highlights that have been brought down. So just a personal preference, that's just how I've always done it. By all means, that is not a rule. I'm not proposing that everyone should follow that rule. That's just a personal thing for me. But as you can tell, obviously it is underexposed, so we're going to fix that. And there's also some kind of dark either cloud up here or possibly part of where the filter holder was. It might not have been perfectly straight, so we're going to fix that as well. But what we're going to go from is we're going to go from this, and we're going to get to this full shot. Basically, it's just going to take a little messing around, and we're going to get that. So we're going to go back to this one. Now we're going to go to full screen mode, and we're going to shrink this bar, and let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of this dark gray. It's just really distracting, and whether it was a mistake on my part, and I am not a good photographer, so that's very possible, or if it was just some darker clouds. The easiest way to do something like this, because there's no detail up here, it's just the sky, is to use the spot removal tool. So if we go over here, we're just going to basically paint on a big space, essentially. And then we're going to drag this over here because we don't need it from so far away. And it's gone. A little bit of color or discoloration is normal, especially when there's clouds in the sky. Just the really darkness of those clouds was distracting, so we wanted to get rid of that. And then the next thing I wanted to do is, if you can, I'm not sure if you can tell or not, but the buildings are kind of flared out, and that's probably because my camera wasn't perfectly level. So the easiest way to fix that is by going into the transform tab here, and we're just going to go add about +5 vertical, which straightens things out quite a bit. And then we're just going to choose constrain crop, because what that's going to do is it's going to get rid of all of the white space up here. So we're going to get in there, and that's good. And finally, before we get into adding stuff, I find that it's best to get rid of, or to deal with the stuff that you're getting rid of first before you go into the additive side. So we're going to crop this, and I've really preferred this to be a kind of a landscape type shot. And we're going to unlock the proportions here. And so we're just going to be able to scroll up and down here. So I don't know, how about right there? And the other, I wanted to crop the sides here just a little bit. Personally, and this, once again, this is just a personal preference for me, I find my eyes see it easiest when there's something tall and it kind of gets to as far down as it's going to go. Like if we left it, if we left the side back here, it would draw too much attention to that side of the image. I just didn't like that, so that's okay. Not sure why I was trying to rotate there. Let's bring this down a little bit. And we're going to do the same thing on this side here. We're just going to make sure that we have enough space that this little building is there, and that's the lowest spot in the image. So we'll crop to that point, and that's better. All right, actually there's a little bit of this path here that I want to crop out again, so we'll go a little bit higher. There we go, that's better. Okay, so the first thing obviously that we need to do is to bring up the shadows. The buildings are really, really dark, and the first thing that obviously stands out is it's just too dark, so we'll bring up the shadows all the way. We're still going to do other things to brighten them up a little bit, but that's a good first step right there. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to add a graduated filter at the bottom to basically just deal with the buildings. Pardon me. And we're going to feather that down a bit. And we're going to go like that. Maybe a third of a stop. The other thing we're going to do is, or other thing I'd like to do here is add about a stop of exposure to the whole image, just to brighten it up just a little bit. Just perfect like that. Actually, and let's go into the graduated filter and even bring that down a little bit more. It's still a little bit too high. Yeah, 0.14 is good. Okay, so now that we've got that, the next thing that you can tell is there's definitely a blue cast. So if we want to balance that out a bit, we'll bring this up to about 7,500. And then now that we've brought up the yellow, if you look at the snow on the ground on the front here, you can tell that there's definitely a green cast. So we're going to add some pink to that as well, and bring that up to about 52. Sure, that works. Now that we have that image a lot more balanced, and now we can start working on the more specific sections, like adding color, adding clarity, that kind of stuff. So what I'd like to do first is pull down the highlights. You can see in the windows here on Bankers Hall that they're a little too bright. So what I'd like to do is just bring those highlights down, maybe to maybe minus 19 or 20 or so. And then the other thing we need to do is the whites and blacks. So as we've talked about in other videos with the sharpening, where you hold the Alt or Option key on your keyboard to do the masking, you can do something similar with the whites and blacks. So if you hold the Alt or Option key and you bring the white slider over, you can see this little light here is obviously blown out, and we're never going to fix that. So we're just going to ignore that for a minute. But if we go like this, once you start to see other pixels popping through here, like over here, those are a little overblown as well, so we're going to ignore those as well. Right about there, maybe, yeah. Plus 49 looks about good. And then the blacks, we're going to do the same thing, except sliding them to the left. Once we see stuff start to pop through here, so you can see down in the garage area here, it's coming through a little bit. If we keep going, what happens? Let's say, yeah. All right, so that looks good. The next thing I wanted to do, I'd add some clarity, and the reason for that is it adds just a little bit of contrast to the edges of the windows on some of the buildings. So we're just going to bring that up. I just like to add maybe 20 or so. We're going to do some more sharpening, some global sharpening in a bit, but that's a good starting point. And then the vibrance, we're going to add quite a bit because I really liked how colorful this image was. So we'll add maybe 40, 43, I guess. And some global saturation just to give it a little more overall color. So that's good. Now, the next thing that I wanted to do, and this is the first time I've ever actually played around with this tool, so I'm very excited to hear what your comments are about this. I'm probably doing this completely wrong, but hey, I'm not a good photographer, so tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what you would do differently, right? The first thing I want to do is I'd like to turn up the saturation, but we're going to change the color in a minute here. So we'll change the up the saturation to about 47, and then what I wanted to do is I wanted to give it a very yellow hue in the shadows. So that's what this slider is doing. So we'll give it about 49 or so. Now, obviously, the image is much yellower now in the shadows. So to balance that, we're just going to add some blue to the shadows. I'm sorry, yellow in the highlights. I've been saying shadows. Yellow in the highlights, and we're going to add blue to the shadows. So basically the same thing. We're going to change the up the saturation to 40-ish, and then we're going to bring the hue all the way over to about 230, 240, let's say. And that's good. And then the other thing that I'd want to do is I wanted to change, adjust the balance of where that point is, of where it considers the highlights, and the shadows. So that I feel like that is the most balance we're going to find. It gives a nice little bit of yellow light to the snow on the ground, which is to me, the most important part. And then one final thing that I'd like to do is on the graduated filter that I created, I'd add some more saturation to bring out more of the brick color in this building. So bring that up a little bit, maybe to 24, maybe even a little more. Perfect. And then I also want to create another graduated filter for the sky. Now, what we're going to be doing with the sky is basically adding bringing back some more blue into the sky. So we'll reset the temperature and the saturation. And the best way I've found to do this is by creating the graduated filter at approximately the same or alternate angle as the sun. So basically, as the sun is basically almost right on the horizon, it's going to be at this kind of level. So it would make sense that the most top right corner is going to have the most color. So that's why I do it on this angle. I mean, there's no exact right answer, but just to kind of give it a little more realism. And then what I would do is I'd add some dehaze. And what that does is it gets rid of or cuts through some of the clouds, so it makes it look a little more realistic. You don't want to go too high because then it looks obvious and fake with this dark blue up here. But by using, 15 or 16, that's the real color of the sky at the time, complementing the yellow from the sun over there. So we'll finish that. And then the last thing we need to do is just add some sharpening and some noise reduction in a minute, but we'll talk about that in a sec. So as usual, hold the Alt or Option key on the keyboard for the masking, and we're just going to drag this up quite a bit. We're really just looking to sharpen just the real edges of some of the windows here and things. So we don't need to be sharpening anything in the sky or anything like that. And that's good. So we're going to add about, let's say, 75 sharpening on top of that mask. And then the other thing is, if we zoom in here to the buildings, there is some noise in the deep shadows. So we're just going to add about 25. Or move the noise reduction luminance slider to 25. And the way we got that number, as I've discussed in other videos, is you never want the amount of sharpening combined with the amount of luminance noise reduction to total in addition to 100. So basically, if you're doing 75 sharpening, you only want to go to a maximum of 25 luminance. If you're doing 50 sharpening, you only want to go 50, that kind of thing. So it shouldn't add up to more than 50 or more than 100. You can definitely stay below 100 for sure, but you should never go above that. Otherwise, you'll start to get really weird artifacting and stuff in your photo. So, I mean, basically at this point, I'd call this image effectively done. I might take the brush tool, maybe brush in a little more color in certain places, but for all intents and purposes, this is a finished image. So what do you think? Are there things that you would have done that I didn't? Are there things I did that you wouldn't have? As long as you can keep your criticisms constructive, I would love to hear what you think in the comments down below. If you like this video, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. And if you really like this video, I'd really ask that you consider clicking the subscribe button. It means a lot to me, and it'll ensure that you get to see the next video that should be out in 2 weeks' time. But until then, my name is Justin Smith. I am not a good photographer, and until next time, bye for now.